I've actually had people asking me on social media, how are you in Europe right now if you're not vaccinated? And I'm not vaccinated against COVID. And the reason I'm here is because I have to take every 72 hours a COVID test showing that I have a negative test, that I don't have COVID. Here's the thing. You can't do that in everyday life. You can't get a test every 72 hours to go to the grocery store or to walk into a restaurant. So those who are instituting these rules know that it not only is it draconian, but it's impossible to live up to. And eventually, in order to live any kind of regular, normal life, you would have to be vaccinated. 3 countries, Israel, the UK, and Scotland, that were the first countries in the world to almost entirely vaccinate their entire populations. Israel was first in line. And the problem that we're seeing right now, Manila, is something that's called vaccine failure, which is that right now about half of the people who are being hospitalized in Israel were already vaccinated. In Scotland, it's the same, 40% in the UK. And I just saw numbers that show that Singapore is experiencing the same thing now, and those numbers are starting to come out. So one of the things we're hearing from people is, wait a minute, why are you demanding that we get vaccinated if we can still contract COVID and even have to be hospitalized even if we're vaccinated? So there's a huge concern about that. There's an enormous concern about kids. As you know, myocarditis, even the CDC in the United States has recognized that, yes, there is a much higher rate of heart inflammation in kids who are getting this. So there are a lot of questions around it. And I think the problem that people come from, whether you're in France or Italy or Spain or the United States, is a fear that says these are still emergency use authorizations. We should not be forced to get these vaccinations.
Investigative journalist and co-host of Boom Bust, our friend Ben Swan, is on the ground in Madrid, Spain. He's joining us with more on this. So Ben, first, tell us what all went down this weekend. What did you see?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. So as you mentioned, I'm in Madrid right now. Here in Spain, there were 2 major protests, one in Madrid and another one in Barcelona. But it's really been across Europe. We're talking about France, Italy, Greece, in the UK, really, we're seeing it all over the world, really. Australia, which is obviously not in Europe, but Australia had protests as well. And so what we're seeing is a pushback against 3 things. One is mandatory vaccinations. Protesters are saying they have no interest in that. Number 2, they're pushing back against these vax passes, or as they call it, the green pass. And then there's also a pushback, and we saw a lot of this here in Spain, a pushback against forcing kids to be vaccinated before they're allowed to go back to school. So those are the 3 major issues that I think have commonality between all these protests, which, by the way, drew probably collectively millions of people together.
Now, Ben, the European authorities, they're not calling it a vaccine passport. I mean, like you said, the green pass, it's some sort of rebranding, but it sounds effectively like that's what it is, a vaccine passport. What are some of the implications of that?
Well, the implications are huge, and it's not just a vaccine passport, right? It's a 2-tiered system of living. Essentially, what people in these countries are being told is that if you are vaccinated, you get to participate in regular life for the most part. Though, by the way, here in Spain, if you're vaccinated, you still have to walk around with a mask on if you're indoors. If you're outdoors, you don't have to be. So right now, the rules are no different between vaccinated and unvaccinated.
Would you compare these protests to the Yellow Vest movement that we saw in France pre-pandemic? I mean, is this going to go on and on and on?
I think it is. You know, there's now been 2 consecutive weekends in France. I think we'll see it again in multiple cases. I think the Yellow Vests were the beginning of it. But what we're seeing now is a real push to say there are people who are calling out, whether you're in Spain, it's, libertad, or in France, it's liberté, or in the United States, we call it liberty, right? I talked about this on a podcast recently. No matter where you are, the word is slightly different because of the language, but the sentiment is the same, and I don't see that going away so long as parliaments push for the will of the people.